Cette conférence va maintenant être enregistrée.
Hi everyone, my name is Chantal Kimden. I'm an associate professor at Sherbrooke University, and today I'm going to talk about the evidence we have for telerehabilitation with children with disabilities. So I have no conflict of interest to declare, but just want to acknowledge that my views on the evidence might obviously be a little bit biased based on the experience we have with telerehabilitation within my own research lab. And when we talk about evidence, we often think about evidence-based practice, and I'm sure you have seen this before. So evidence-based practice is a combination of scientific evidence, clinical experience, and patient preference. So today what we're going to do is I'm going to start with scientific evidence, really looking at the results of a literature review we conducted and published just a few months ago, so pretty much up to date. And in part two, we're going to look at the more kind of personal experience, so grounded in our research experience, but really discussing more the implications of the evidence and the lessons learned through our use of telerehabilitation with children. I'm not going to speak about explicitly patient preference, but you will see that it's actually embedded in our reflection. And I would say that it's not only about patient preference, perhaps, nowadays, but also really about feasibility. So we're going to discuss what's actually feasible to do with regard to telerehabilitation with children. So now with regards to scientific evidence, this is the article that I want to share the results with you today. So it's published just a few months ago, so it's accessible online if you have access to a library. And if not, the postprint should be soon available on our website that we are working hard to put live in the next few days. So just before we get into the details of the results, just to give you a bit of background with this review, what we wanted was really to look at the effectiveness of pediatric telerehabilitation, but really also the characteristics of effective intervention. So really looked at randomized controlled trials only because it's a very rigorous design to look at the evidence, at the effectiveness, of interventions. But we really went broad in the sense that we included all interventions where at least one rehabilitation professional was involved. So it could be PTs, but also OTs, SLPs, psychologists, as long as it was telerehabilitation for children. We looked at lots of articles, but really included at the end only 23. And again, because we had very strict criteria in terms of design, really looking only at randomized controlled trials. And most of the studies were published after 2016. So really the evidence we have for telerehabilitation are emerging. And I suspect in the next few years, probably we'll see just a huge increase in studies published, and so increasing the evidence that we will have for telerehabilitation. But even though there's not that many articles that were included, what we can say there's a great diversity of population and teleintervention characteristics that we observe in the articles that we included, but also honestly in the articles we did not include. So before we get into really the details of the results, just want to say with regards to the diversity of population characteristics, there's lots, the best evidence we have in telerehabilitation with children, it's really for children with autism. There's lots of research, very good research being done in autism. There is way less so for children with motor difficulties. So there are some, and mostly for children with cerebral palsy or traumatic brain injury, but very only few studies and lots of other characteristics too. So nothing, for instance, for developmental coordination disorder has been done as at the level of a trial, but yeah, so not included in our review, but still there's a few papers that have been published. And in terms of diversity of teleintervention, we often think about video conferencing, right? When we think about teleintervention, we think about like, not a face-to-face, but like a live conversation with the child or the parent. And there's a few, and mostly with the parents more than with the child. But we also found lots of different other type of interventions. So programs to be completed with either only the parent or the parent and the child. Very few, though, that were exercise program to be completed by the child, as we will see in adults, for instance. We've seen some combination of different type of intervention. We have seen forums, and we also have seen phone calls. So sometimes we think about teleintervention as being something using high technology, but phone calls was actually often included as a way to deliver rehabilitation intervention at distance, which is really the definition of telerehabilitation. Now, really, in terms of evidence, there's lots of ways to do telerehabilitation in terms of intervention characteristics. But what we have seen is really that you can use telerehabilitation to achieve many different treatment goals. So we classified the intervention objectives by different categories. And what we have seen is that many intervention, that was probably the most common, were actually about the children's behavior. So really changing the way the behavior of the child through the teleintervention in itself. Parents' behavior also, and including actually parents also well-being, so decreasing parents' anxiety, improving the interaction of the parents with the child. That was another broad category. And for each of these categories, we do have evidence that the treatment that were tested were actually effective. Severity of symptoms, for instance, in developmental coordination disorder, to decrease the coordination, the coordination issues. This is an example also of intervention objectives that we found. Communication, so with regards to language, pronunciation, understanding, so broad communication goals were actually documented through our literature review. Functional abilities related more to the ability to be able to realize day-to-day activities. So that was another broad category. And finally, motor skills. So in a nutshell, basically, there are just so many treatment goals or objectives that you can achieve through telerehabilitation. It's more about finding a way to actually deliver your intervention online to be able to achieve your treatment goal. Now, our question was also related to how can we design teleintervention that will be effective, the most effective as possible. So among all the different objectives that we just talked about, the one that actually seems to be easiest to achieve or for which we have better results was actually behavioral objectives. So tools related to be able to change either children's or parents' behavior. It perhaps makes sense in a sense that at distance, it is easier to work on behavior perhaps than motor skills. Just to give an example, and I'm not fully convinced because I still believe there's lots of things we can do, even for motor skills at distance. But the current level of evidence that we have is that telerehabilitation is really, there's more evidence for behavioral objectives than any other treatment goals, for instance. When the telerehabilitation was centered on parents, actually, more than on children. And this is quite interesting, but again, probably the way it works, because we are delivering the intervention at distance, it makes sense that it's probably easier to work through the parents, so either to increase knowledge, skills, behaviors, to work with the parents so the parents can do something with the child. That was actually, it seems to be more effective than when it's the child actually was really the focus of the intervention. When there's a specific program to follow, which is kind of interesting too, because we do want to have treatments individualized to the family's needs. But when there's a very structured program, so a program that, for instance, parents will go through and read, or there's a specific sets of exercise for the parents to do with the child in week 1 up to week 10, for instance, it seems to help with the effectiveness. Coaching, so using a coaching approach, It's really problem solving, so being centered on parents' goal, so to help parents learn new skills. And there were like a broad variety of coaching style interventions. But in general, coaching seems to be much more information than only providing information. So just asking parents to read information by themselves, for instance, was less effective than when a more broadly defined coaching intervention was used. Dosage was another important thing. So we found that when intervention were delivered at least once a week for over 8 weeks, they tended to be more effective. So to have more changes and the outcomes they were looking at. There's probably a bit of a caution note here, because I guess it probably depends also of what are your treatment goals, right? But again, we were looking at children with disabilities, so most of them needing also long-term, perhaps, intervention or support. But in general, I think it speaks about relationships that you want to create with families. The last one also probably need to be interpreted with caution, but we found that when there were psychologists involved in the intervention, it tended to be more effective. So the objectives tended to increase over time. It might be related also because most of the intervention we found, including a psychologist, were related to behavioral objectives. Lots were also related to the population of children with autism, which is actually interventions for which we have more evidence around the effectiveness of telerehabilitation. But again, at least it gives us some ideas what to consider when we want to deliver effective intervention session for children. And I would say, in a conclusion with regards to scientific evidence, that the question is not, is telerehabilitation effective for children with disabilities, but rather we should ask ourselves, like for whom, like for which populations, but with which characteristics the family should have, for instance, so that the intervention are more effective. And for what objectives? So again, I think for the broad categories of objectives, we know that it could be achieved through telerehabilitation. But if you go into more specific objectives, which are the ones that respond best, for instance, to tele intervention? And under what circumstances? So how should we use the different technology available? How should we design the intervention to increase the effectiveness of our teleintervention? Those are probably really the questions that we in the future will need to look at. But if you want to respond to the question, is telerehabilitation effective for children with disabilities? In general, the response is yes, clearly. So now if I move to more our personal experience, again, grounded in our research program, and we try to reflect about what should be done face-to-face and what should be done online, and perhaps what could be done either way, I would argue that probably most of what you would do face-to-face could somehow be done online. Is it more effective face-to-face or online? I would say it would depend on the intervention. But with COVID, there's clearly a push that what might be even like more effective face-to-face. Now, probably we want to try it online, and it will be effective, perhaps less effective than face-to-face because it's online, but perhaps also the time that we as therapists get more comfortable about what are the best way to deliver this intervention online to meet our goals. But really clearly things that can only be done face-to-face, obviously if you require equipment, perhaps you will say, well, then I cannot do it online. But there's lots of things that we have in our house, for instance, that could perhaps be done online and that could actually be used online to help design your intervention. And with regards to handling and hands-on, for instance, obviously there are things that you cannot do, but then if you think about what's your treatment goal, is there a way that as opposed to do hands-on, you could use, for instance, a coaching approach and be able to actually coach the family to be able to do some kind of hands-on intervention with the child, and through observation and feedback, through video conferencing, you could perhaps even help the parent deliver some kind of intervention. Now, there's also obviously security reasons why there's perhaps things that you don't want to do online with regards, for instance, to falls or any other reason. And it's absolutely fine, right? I think we shouldn't do everything online, but I'm just thinking that there's probably lots of things that we would never normally have considered doing online. But now with the COVID crisis, there's perhaps ways to be creative and try to achieve our goals with different ways using technology. Um, and just to say, so our experience with telerehabilitation is really grounded. So we have, over the past 5 years, used different strategies using online modules, where it was mostly reading, and this is where we actually have moved through more active form of intervention, using community of practice, using a platform where we add online modules, but also a forum, also video conferencing. Some things worked, other things didn't work that well, so we did some refinement and testing, and now we have a trial ongoing, so where we have a pragmatic trial, so using a WeCare is actually an acronym for web-based early intervention, multimodal intervention for children. And so we are really hoping to be able to contribute generating more evidence in the future. But what we have been able to observe through these experiences thus far is really the importance of creating personalized relationships. So the same way, actually, face-to-face, we would create a relationship with family. It's really important to engage with them early on, be able to get to know them, their personal situation, to tailor the intervention, obviously, on their own goals and objectives. So really be able to, yes, have a structured program, perhaps, or approach, but really be able to personalize the experience and have this personal contact with the family. So not just saying, I'm there just in case you need it, but really be able to have touch points, perhaps, at different moments, where really you just say hi to the family and what's up, perhaps. The importance of having timely response to families' concrete needs. So yes, touching base, just to know how families are doing is important, but whenever they have questions, concerns, either when they write it or they express it orally, it's really important to be able to work with them collaboratively, so use coaching approach, but be able to very quickly after they express a need, be able to provide and follow up on their requests to actually be able to find concrete solutions to respond to their needs. And using this problem-solving coaching approach, really grounded on day-to-day lived experience for families, because really what seems to work best is really to respond to address issues and concerns that emerge on a daily basis, more than perhaps proposing interventions that are driven a little bit more by the therapist. And again, using a variety of technological modalities. So you might have things that you want family to read. So when we're saying that coaching is better than just information, does it mean that information, having families read things is not good, but it's perhaps not enough. So having a phone call just to know if they have questions about what they read, if something pop up this week or last week, to know how they are doing. So really using a combination of modalities depending on what are your treatment goals. And having support, so some families are just very comfortable with technology, others are not, so be able to support them and also just switch from one technology to the other depending on families' level of comfort with technology too. And to conclude the presentation, I try to develop an acronym with regards to virtual services. So really viewing, so ask yourself, what can you observe? How can you use video conferencing to observe the child or the family in their day-to-day lives and actually problem solve and work with them to actually help them? And information. So what is the information that the family needs to be able to have a greater well-being, to help the child function better? So really information sharing is really something that is somehow easy to do in telerehabilitation. So really build on the information, but again, using a coaching approach. So this is the idea to create relationship. So be able to get to know personally the family and use this coaching approach to be able to build capacity within the family, within the child, within the parents. With regards to technology, again, I was saying there's lots of different technologies that we can use, but just make sure that you are ready to use the different technologies that you're planning to use for your telerehabilitation, and just use it correctly and be able to problem solve with technology too as issues arrive. Remember that families are unique, so even if we recommend that there's some kind of structure in your teleintervention, what are the specific family's needs and context? So really working in a problem solving approach will also make you work on the family's own goals and objectives, which is associated with greater effectiveness of rehabilitation intervention. In access, telerehabilitation is often used as a strategy to increase access, and we see it in the crisis with the COVID. So, but think also about like the virtual services, are they accessible for all? So do families need to have a computer? Do all the families that should access your services, do you have a computer and access to internet? And if not, what are the other options perhaps to reach out to these families? Phone, working with community partners perhaps, but just think about access. So telerehabilitation as a strategy to increase access, but also some accessibility and equity issues that might also relate to using only telerehabilitation. And finally, just don't forget the legal aspects, especially with regards to confidentiality. So just make sure that whenever you design telerehabilitation intervention, you follow regulations in your own country. So just a big thank you to you all for listening today. A big thank you to my team. I'm very fortunate to work with a bunch of students, coordinators, collaborators, having lots of great ideas and energy. And a big thank you to the different funders too who have made this research program accessible and feasible. And if you do have questions and comments, please do check out our website, where we hope to post soon more information about telerehabilitation. And feel free to drop me an email too. Always a pleasure to hear from you. So thank you and have a good day.